Mr. David Iweta joins us now. He's the National Vice President of NACIMA. Thank you for coming on today.
My pleasure.
Well, you know, lots of people are watching and waiting now, but the policy direction is clear enough, isn't it, for would-be investors or investors who are already here? Do you get the same vibe?
Well, I do not to a large extent, because when policies are formulated and the operators or executors of the policies are not carried along while it is being prepared, it becomes difficult for you to implement or execute what you were not part of its formulation. So I think there is a need for the government to deliberately consider the involvement of organized private sector in developing policies and formulas that they would operate. Because if you see the economy, the size of the Nigerian economy is considered about 500 billion naira, but the annual budget of our economy is in the region of $22–25 billion, which is about 10% of the size of Nigerian economy. And therefore, the rest of 85% or 90% is operated by the private sector. And so why would the government not deliberately or consciously involve the private sector in all their policy decisions in terms of industrialization?
But isn't the government doing that? Because time and again, we hear them say that they have this stakeholders forum, they reach out to the private sector, they have this roundtable conversation, different economic summits. Aren't they part of the policy formulation already?
You see, I think that question is quite interesting. Now, when you, as government, have taken a position and you are merely inviting the private sector to be a listener, you have not got it right. You see, what ought to be done is you, before you make budget, you invite the private sector at various segments of the economy: agriculture, manufacturing, servicing, maritime, and all of that, to project what they expect from, on the economic performance for the year forthcoming. And then when they come in that level, even when we had military era, in the era of, General Babangida, we had what is called a pre-budget dinner with the private sector and a post-budget dinner with the private sector, so as to review what the government went into at the beginning of the year. And when they review the budget performance, they call in for a post-budget dinner, so as to refine-tune the performance of the budget, to know how it has performed, how it has affected the private sector. Because the private sector is the driver of the economy. And so organizations like NACIMA, for example, has offices or chambers of commerce in every city in Nigeria, and local governments, and even state government, state level. As such, we should now look at what is it that this chamber of commerce in this state can provide in terms of job creation. And the state government, in designing their budgets, will come and say, how many jobs can you provide?
Has this happened in states at all? Has NACIMA come forward to any state whatsoever with this proposition? Yeah,
NACIMA are represented by the various city chambers of commerce. Okay, that's why you have, the Sapele Chamber of Commerce, Benin Chamber of Commerce, Warri Chamber of Commerce, Asaba Chamber of Commerce. And all of this will come together to create an association of the Delta, chambers of commerce. You have the Lagos Chamber of Commerce. You have Abeokuta Chamber of Commerce. You have, Akure Chamber of Commerce. All are the avenues through which government policies should trickle down to affect and stimulate the economy by opening the economy such that everyone is a player and creating the needed employment. For example, the federal government has come out, by the next 10 years, we're going to create 100 million jobs. And that means 10 million jobs per year. And that is a very, very ambitious target. Only economists like China came up with a program of creating employment for 10 million jobs per year. And the size of Chinese economy is several way above that of Nigeria. So if we want to be moderate and say, okay, the federal government has said 100 million jobs. And now, how do we create this job? Now, state government, we have 36 states. And if you share that, it comes to about 270 million jobs per state, because every of the states have said they have the capacity to remain as a state. And you now bring that to the local government level, like Delta State that has 25 local governments, that will come to about 11 million jobs per annum.
So have states been pulling their weight in this regard?
Not at all. I must tell you, not at all.
Just to get the figures clear, you said 270 million per state.
Yes, at 36. Doing 10 million, 100 million.
So that's 100 million divided by 36. That's way less than 270 million.
Now, if you share, by way of, calculation, 100 million jobs, you share that, it comes to about 270, okay? And then by the time you further divide that, say by state, considering about the Delta State, for example, that has 25, you'll be looking at about 11,000 jobs.
I understand that the millions, the zeros can be a bit confusing sometimes, but then that's even on one hand. Let's talk about how much you can contribute. The private sector can contribute to this 100 million jobs over 10 years. But if you could put figures to it, how much can you contribute?
Fine. Now, the contribution of the private sector, it's not a thing you can project by mere procrastination. All right? It's a thing that you come and say, yes, through agriculture, what can you do? Through service provision, what can you do? Through maritime, what can you do? Through housing, what can you do? Okay? Because, for example, when the government came up with the policy of garment, textile, and cotton, that is the second largest employer of labor in the world outside agriculture. And it is a fact that it's been pronounced. What is the program laid for its implementation?
So just before, I think you meant to say 2.7 million, not 270 million, because
okay, maybe by the division.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And that is a very small figure, which local governments could drive. And if you have people that have the capacity being elected but not selected into the position of local government chairman, all of this is a thing that can be done. But and so the federal government have said it, trickle it down, and let every local government wake up, because the employment is in the rural area.
All right. Let's get to Abuja as well on this, Mark.
Well, thank you, Chamberlain. We have with us in the studio Alhaji Issa Ozi Salami, OFL, who is the president, Nigerian Institute for Industrial Security, and also former member of both ICPC and the African Union Advisory Board on Anti-Corruption. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, you can hear our guest there in Lagos Studios setting the agenda on the economy, looking at industrial security, job creation, and perhaps even anti-corruption, which you have sat on boards for. What exactly would you be saying this government needs to do?
Well, first of all, government needs to take stock. And it's only when they take stock realistically. And in doing this, there's need for a lot of consultation, because a lot of things cannot be done by government alone. I mean, let's take the example of corruption. Government alone cannot fight corruption. It needs the involvement of all and sundry. So therefore, there's need to involve stakeholders and discuss with them. And then also, even in the appointment of the ministers, and I talked about stock taking, the president has his agenda and he had campaigned and promised certain things. Many of these ministers who are now going to head ministries may not have been closely or been very intimate with some of these things.
Yeah, but so, they had a two-day retreat.
Yes, well, I mean, today's retreat will not give sufficient details as to what is to be done and so on. They need to really go and study what the direction is and then how to project further from there. So that is very, very important. And as I said, this needs to be done with stakeholders. I mean, take, for instance, the labor ministry. The labor unions have protested vehemently that they are not happy to have their former minister back, and he has been brought back. And this is going to bring some little confrontation before, you know, they are able to even things out and so on. So some of these feelings, sensitivity of people must be taken into account in this stock-taking exercise that I talked about. And then in fighting anti-corruption, there are certain institutions that have been established for anti-corruption. It's not only in Nigeria, but in all of Africa. There's something typical. They are not sufficiently funded. They are underfunded, and there are some critics who believe that it is deliberate, that African governments want to be seen to be fighting corruption because it is fashionable to be said to be doing so, but in effect, they don't really want it to succeed. So I think Nigeria, being the chairman of being the champion of anti-corruption in Africa, needs to make the lead by funding the anti-corruption agencies so that they can perform very well.
Yeah, that criticism, though, do you think it would apply to Nigeria? Not in terms of funding, but in terms of African leaders just wanting to fight corruption because it is fashionable. Would you say the same of the leadership of this country?
No, I mean, in the case of Nigeria, we have even campaigned on corruption. And we're lucky that Nigerians elected the government in 2015 when the campaign was strongest on anti-corruption, which means Nigerians are ready to buy in. And one would have thought that we could take leverage on that.
What I'm asking is, do you see the political will to drive that?
Well, I mean, from pronouncements, you would think so. But from actions, sometimes you are confused, as it were, because actions don't follow. And sometimes they are delayed. And, you need to be very prompt because you want to give an impression that this is what is happening.
If we're to take stock, though, reflecting on that fight against corruption, I know that in the first term of the president, there were several policies that were brought up. One of them is the whistleblowing policy. We haven't heard much of it since then. We don't know if it's still in existence. But it would seem that, there seems to be some new bite with some of the revelations we have been hearing in recent times, especially on the front pages. Does that give you any hope? No,
the problem with us is that we want to fight corruption on the pages of the newspapers, which goes back to where we started from, that given the semblance that we're doing something, when in fact, when you look at the bottom line, in business, it is the bottom line, the profit that matters a lot. And you find that in the end, there's very little to show. And of course, the resources, as I said, the inputs are not commensurate with the expectations. And if this is not solved, it's just like trying to put something on nothing. So the basics have to be established, and the anti-corruption institutions must be allowed to operate, and they must operate independently so that it is systemic. It does not depend on the faces of the person in power. I mean, for instance, a lot of times, especially around 2015, people are saying, oh, the body language of the president alone has checked corruption and so on and so forth. Those who have said all this, but this has not been followed up in reality, and this is why, I mean, for instance, if you see the ranking of Nigeria in the Transparency Index, we have actually gone lower, and this is because we're not systemic about it. And as I said, no one person or a group of people can fight corruption. It has to be generic, and people have got to be made to buy in. And there must be a lot of collaboration. For instance, some of the other agencies that are not anti-corruption agencies can buy in, like the National Orientation Agency can do quite a lot because they do a lot of propaganda at the grassroots and so on and so forth.
Well, you have president of the Nigerian Institute for Industrial Security. We've been talking about the fourth industrial revolution. and people are wondering where we are in the middle of all of that. What should we be doing to get our industrial policies right? If you were to be setting an agenda for the Minister for Trade and Industry, what would you be saying his or her job will be?
Well, talking about industrialization, the most important is the completion of Ajaokuta Steel Complex, because that steel complex will spill into quite a lot of things. Even the issue of unemployment, it can take the load off the government, because the number of people that can be employed directly and indirectly, we're talking of millions. And the project is almost 90-something% completed. And yet, we don't seem to want to move to complete it. And the president has promised when he went to campaign in Kogi State that he was going to make sure it is completed. Now, the argument as to whether government should complete it by itself or it should give it to private sector to complete has been dragging, and there seems to be no conclusion. And I think the earlier this is concluded, the better for the country.
What would you advise, though? Would you say government should put its money there, or should it involve the private sector?
No, I think it's a mixture of the two will be very important. Even if government is going to involve the private sector, there needs to be robust discussions and understandings. And the template had to be laid whereby there will be timelines set and there will be checks and balances. And this is where I blame the Bureau for Public Enterprises, where I had the privilege of being an advisor one time. The Bureau for Public Enterprises templates give them this supervisory role of checking to make sure that what was promised at the time of privatization is being followed. But usually, they don't take this very seriously. And if they are not followed, there are certain provisions for you to even be able to take the thing back and privatize it to somebody else and so on. But we are not always very strict about this follow-up.
So Ajaokuta is one. What else will be the next one?
Even the completion of, the moribund textile industries and a lot of the industries that have immigrated from Nigeria to even nearby countries like Ghana, like you used to have Dunlop tires and, Michelin tires and so on. So all this, we should find out what exactly is the incentive they need to come back. And this, as the gentleman in Lagos said, you cannot think for the private sector. You should let them come up. I mean, during the first Buhari military regime, I was part of the regular consultation process that was being headed by the chief.
Yeah, he said you cannot think for the private sector, but doesn't government have a duty to tell the private sector where its own policy direction is headed?
No, yes, but if they have an input to bring, you have to check what is their capacity, what do they need to help them. I mean, that time there was this deletion program whereby, you can reduce the component of imported goods so that we can save foreign exchange. Industries were invited. I was then in the Pojo, and we were invited to explain what we needed so that we can increase the local content of Pojo. Just like this thing that is happening with NNPC now. They have a local content department and so on. These areas need to be strengthened.
It's a fine place to leave it. Alhaji Issa Ozisalami, we have to thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning. He is the president of Nigerian Institute for Industrial Security and a former member of both the ICPC, as the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission, and the African Union Advisory Board on Anti-Corruption. Sunrise Daily continues in a moment. Please stay with us.
All right, it's our concluding moments now. And speaking about the private sector, which you touched on before we went back to Abuja, and in the context of trying to see how we could boost domestic lending. We know that banks they're wary of increasing their loan portfolio because of the history of non-performing loans. But we've seen them go ahead and buy bonds Nigerian bonds. What should we be doing? Because if they continue doing that, that's not freeing up capital for the private sector. What should we be focusing on to ensure that you free up capital for the private sector and then they can have that capacity to go on?
Yes, I think, to be honest, the central bank governor is coming up with some very positive policies that could help to energize this sector by giving for a directive that by 30th September, all the banks should give a minimum of 60% of their loan deposit ratio. That is a late wake up, but it is something to start with because countries like South Africa lend 90% of their deposits as loan, while countries like Kenya do 76%. And so we are saying we are the giant of Africa. We are not creating the deliberate economic financial policy that will drive the economy. And by so doing, we're lacking behind.
What do you think is responsible for that?
You see, there has been the focus of government concentrating on the banks, and the banks are not made to really do what is called real lending. And instead of marrying the program of being rent collectors. If you don't give me money, I don't give you loan. If I want 10 million naira from you and I need to get a letter of credit or a bank guarantee, they'll ask me to provide the equivalent in cash in my own account before such letter of credit or bank guarantee can be issued. And so there is need by the central bank particularly to divert to what is known as all asset debenture funding of projects by giving the banks the leverage to absorb whatever risk that may fall out of projects like agriculture, which the commercial banks are shying away from because it has a lot of attendant risk, which people, in the agri sector usually come across. And more so, there is no way the commercial agriculture cannot be a factor that will drive Nigerian economy. You cannot drive an economy with lack of infrastructure with small and medium scale. All the economy you refer to in America, in Asia, they have the basic infrastructure for small and medium scale to strive. But you must make the big industry to be operational, so as the small and medium scale could now be appendage attached to the large scale to survive. Because right now, the small and medium scale surviving depends on the purchasing power in the pocket of the ordinary man. Today, there is almost empty pocket by the large consumer of our population, which is the youthful, set of our economy. And so we have big challenge in our hands without deliberately creating means to empower the private sector through real sector support funding, which the CBN will not put the liability on the commercial bank.
I know that the government is also considering this, I think they call it entrepreneurship bank or something like that, but who knows? We'll look at that in the days ahead. But thank you for coming on this morning. Mr. David Iweta is the National Vice President of NASIMA. Well, that is the show today. Thank you all for watching. We will be back next week. I'm Chamberlain Oso.
I am Kayode Okikele.
And I'm Ayo Makine.
And I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. To have a lovely weekend.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this program are those of the maker and do not reflect the views, opinions, and endorsement of Channels Television.